Good morning, everyone. I'd like to introduce John Lovett. John Lovett is a GIS analyst with the North Carolina Wildlife Resources Commission. Since 2020, he has worked on projects across the agency ranging from forestry data management to tool development for endangered species assessment. And without further ado, I will turn it over to him.
Thank you, and thanks everybody for coming. Happy Friday. I hope you had a great conference. So I'm going to talk a little bit about ways that we can make our job easier, specifically by leveraging Python notebooks in ArcGIS Online to streamline daily tasks and improve email notifications. Quick overview, I'll talk about a little bit about daily tasks, specifically as an employee of the state working in the state's IT environment and some of the considerations we have to keep in mind in that realm. A brief intro to ArcGIS Online notebooks, and then I'll just go through some examples of ways that we've implemented these notebooks to make some processes easier at Wildlife. So daily tasks, things like ETL, file backups, administering our organization, feature updates. This is the kind of stuff that we probably all spend more time on than we'd like to admit. But it's also a lot of processes that are ripe for automating, for scheduling, for using things like Python to make our lives easier and take these tasks off of our daily plate of point and click and scripting them. This is obviously not an exhaustive list of the things that we do as GIS analysts. Some considerations though when we are looking at trying to automate tasks, especially in my case working within the state's IT environment, is we have to be really conscious of the permissions that we have as an organization. What can and can't we connect, for example, like our Outlook account to? And when making those kind of decisions, I've found that it's really useful to make use of internal environments. We already all have ArcGIS Online connections. We already all have Office. So how can we link these things together to automate tasks and again, to make our lives easier? When we're scheduling tasks or trying to automate stuff, there's always the option of doing it locally on your computer using like Windows Task Scheduler or something like that. But there's also lots of hosted options like in ArcGIS Online. And when we're trying to make that decision on locally scheduled tasks versus hosted things online, you can think about like, what's the resource consumption on my computer? Do I want to be able to do a lot of other work while something's running in the background locally, or can I put that up on AGOL? And also, do I need to click start to run a process, or can I schedule it to run at 4 a.m. when nobody is accessing a database? And then finally, especially when we are thinking about sending notifications back and forth between applications, do I need an instantaneous response? Does somebody submit a survey and I need to know immediately what the response was in that survey? Or can I aggregate changes over like a 24-hour period and then push all of those changes into a notification at one time? So I've mentioned it a couple times, ArcGIS Online notebooks. If you're not familiar with these, they're essentially like a Jupyter notebook, Python notebook hosted in ArcGIS Online. If you look at that little bar across the top of your screen, unless your organizational administrator has changed what shows up there, there's usually a little box that says notebooks. And if you click on there and open a new notebook, it looks like this one here on the left. They give you a nice little line of code that really is like the basis for any connections within ArcGIS Online. It's using the ArcGIS Python API, which allows you to connect to all of the data that's in your organization. You can manage content, you can manage users, you can update features, anything like that. And if, after this talk, you think this is really cool and you want to check it out, Esri also has a bunch of sample notebooks that when you go, there's a nice little tab that says Esri sample notebooks, and you may be able to right out of the box convert one of those notebooks into something for the task you're trying to accomplish, whether it's managing inactive users or doing some sort of analysis. There's lots of options there, or you can just take nice little chunks of code from there and put it into your own notebook. I will mention there are 3 tiers of notebooks. There's standard notebooks, which are free, don't use any, don't use a lot of credits. I think they use a fraction of a credit per hour of runtime or something like that. And then higher levels, which I haven't touched. I'm not quite sure. I'm not the person to ask about advanced notebooks, but I think if you're doing a lot higher level processing tasks, that may be the route to go. Another cool thing about these is, like I said, you can schedule them. You can set up tasks so that they can run. For example, with this forestry update notebook that I've set, it runs daily at 4 a.m. None of our foresters are out in the field collecting tree data at 4 a.m. So they're not touching our database. It's a good time to run updates and to move things to backup. And all these results are saved in a log, so you can see when something succeeded, or oops, that was not the right button. Or you can see when something failed here, and you can click on this nice little results button, and it'll show you. It gives you kind of like the rundown of what happened when that notebook ran. So to get into some examples, there we go. I'll talk first about the Abandoned and Derelict Vessels Mapping Program. Wildlife received funding and authority from the state to investigate and remove abandoned and derelict vessels along North Carolina's coast. We developed a web app and a field maps application to collect, edit, and monitor these boats, as well as a public-facing application so the public can go in and see the status of the cleanup of these vessels. But we needed to do some back-end data updates after our field staff were submitting data through the field maps application. So implemented a notebook for this. General data management workflow. Staff collect data in the field using a field maps application. We do some data processing in notebooks. And then staff at HQ wanted to know when new boats were added to the system or when something was eligible to be removed. And we wanted to do that through an email notification. After kind of bouncing around a bunch of different options, we settled on Make, which was formerly called Integramat. If you haven't heard of Make yet, Integramat is now Make, to handle the email notification system. And then it sends an email to Outlook, which then gets forwarded out to the relevant parties. So data is collected by our enforcement staff with this nice field maps application. We needed to calculate, one of the problems here is we needed to calculate this unique ID that was both readable for our staff, but was also like not repeating. Readable meaning like it meant something to our staff. So we came up with this nice code with the county code and then the date, and then we needed an incremental number that was not going to repeat. So, oh, hey, we can use the Esri object ID because it's only going to go up. But when this application was built was before some of the nice changes that they've implemented in field maps kind of calculated fields. And we could get this nice calculated expression arcade field here that was the object ID that we wanted, but that wasn't a permanent field. It would populate, in the pop-up on field maps, but it wasn't actually being saved in the data. So that kind of pushed us into like, oh, let's use these notebooks to handle saving that data and doing some other back-end updates within the data set. I'm going to you'll see some chunks of my notebook code here. Don't worry about getting into the weeds, but just to kind of illustrate what this looks like here. This is the basic setup for the notebook. You just like with any Python processing, you can import all your libraries. There's a ton of built-in libraries that are already within the kind of notebook infrastructure. And then, like I mentioned earlier, this import from arcgis.gis, import GIS. That is the connection to your whole organization. And because we're already logged into ArcGIS Online, you don't need to put any credentials or anything in here. It's all just like there and set up. And because I'm an administrator of the organization, it says, hey, watch out, you might break something. So then define some functions, get your feature layer, a function to do some updating to the feature itself, and then a way to connect the webhook, which is part of our notification process. But general primary processing here. Get the data and create some empty dictionaries. Is the boat eligible for removal? Do some date calculations. Has the boat been there for more than 30 days? Or did we get a letter back from the owner that said, yeah, I don't want that anymore? And then populate the county field using some crosswalking of what county does the point fall in, and then populate that unique ID field, which is that county code, the date, and the object ID of the feature. And this all populates some dictionaries with the relevant information that this is all, the concept here is all of this is then going into a chunk of text that's sent over to Make, which then puts together an email notification that comes back to our staff at HQ. And as I mentioned, Esri's done some nice updates, which are kind of constant. That some of this populating the county field and the UID fields is manageable with calculated form expressions now, but this process also still works really great. So finally, we put together this dictionary of, it's split into new features and features that are eligible for removal. And then I just use this request library to send a webhook with all of that data, that just dictionary of text, and that's sent to Make. So when I was setting this up, bounced around a bunch of different places, tried to figure out what's the best option for sending these email notifications that's simple and doesn't require too many of those considerations for moving outside of our basic IT infrastructure setup. And there was this nice blog post from Esri using webhooks to automate workflows. Looks great, but it's really long. You have to get a server token from AGOL, which requires some connection on the back end in Make. You have to wait so you don't make AGOL angry for pinging the server too many times. You have to convert all the text from some binary format that Esri's native webhooks sends across. And then you have to set up a Microsoft 365 connection, and our IT wasn't gonna let that happen. So I distilled that down to this. We have a couple processes to so that chunk of code from the notebook, or the chunk of text at the end is just a dictionary that's parsed here, and the JSON is played around with a little bit. Then it separates those points, those two parts of the dictionary, for new features and features that are updated. And there's a filter here that says if there's no new features or no updated features, then don't run the rest of this. So then this process just stops, and it doesn't try to send an email notification if it doesn't need to, because there were no updates. When this runs every 24 hours. So the notebook runs, it pings this Make process. And so at least the first half of this runs every day, but if there's no features to update, then it just stops and doesn't worry about it. And then the last part, sending this email notification, just some HTML formatting of, pulling these fields, that these fields came directly from my notebook setup. It's fields directly from our field maps input from the staff, and then sending an email. And this was a fun thing that we learned in the process. When Make was still in Integromat, they had this great tool called Send Me an Email, and it just sent an email back to the account holder. And because I set it up with my Outlook email account, I didn't have to set up any extra connections there, no SMTP things, and it just sent an email back to me. But then they updated their system and they got rid of that, unfortunately. And so then I just had to create a dummy Gmail account that's doesn't get used for anything else. I'm sure most of us maybe have a old Hotmail or Yahoo account, but maybe you can use that. And it then sends the email, sends this formatted table here, which then looks like this when it sends from john.lovett@gmail.com to my work email. And then you can use nice little rules within Outlook to forward that out to anybody else internally that needs to be notified when a new ADV is eligible for removal in this example. So kind of to recap that, there was that great blog post from Esri, had a lot of good information to build off of, but I was able to kind of pare that down pretty substantially. Primarily because I want to stay in the free tier of Make, and I don't want to go over 1,000 operations a month. So I'm only running 11 operations max versus 24 in that kind of process there. I didn't need any tokens for my ArcGIS Online organization. I didn't have to link it directly to my Outlook account. The only thing that I have to do is Monday morning I have to go in and say, hey, Gmail, it's okay that I am letting you, I think Gmail says you are letting this this operation have full control of your email account. But whatever, I don't use it for anything else anyway. But what if I need instant notification? So this is taking 24 hours worth of data compiled and sending an email, and that's great. But what if we don't have regular changes? This came to light with a Survey 123 application that we set up for the same purpose, but we wanted the public to be able to submit surveys when they identified a boat so that our staff could go out there and find these vessels and then go through our process. These were irregular submissions. Sometimes you get a couple a day. Sometimes you wouldn't get any for a couple weeks. But there was another route that we could take here for these instant notifications and instant emails using Microsoft Power Automate. And again, because we're with the state, we're staying within the state's IT infrastructure. And again, wanted to remain in the free tier and not use any of those premium connectors within Power Automate. So briefly, when a survey is submitted, it sends a ping to Power Automate, sends a webhook on the survey submission. We do just a little bit of getting the time of the survey, converting from Esri's really long-winded and not human-readable date and time format. I didn't want to use the premium tier email attachment, so you can pull the URLs as a string from the survey submission and then connect those, and then I can send an email via Outlook, which of course comes through really small here. Nicely formatted. This is essentially the survey response as an email, and so our relevant staff can get that information. And again, this is an instantaneous response to a survey submission rather than every 24 hours or how often you schedule your notebook. So a couple other just brief examples, talking about more feature update kind of stuff. We manage, we are responsible for about 500,000 acres across the state, many of which we being wildlife have managed timber resources on. And so we have a ton of data on our forestry management, but there's a lot of moving pieces there. For example, we do timber sales, and we have a Survey 123 set up that we can do compliance surveys for those timber sales. But that's a separate feature service from our forestry data. And so using notebooks, we can do kind of crosswalk those two data sets and determine whether a timber sale is in or out of compliance. We can compile receipt information for those sales and update back and forth from that Survey 123 application and feature service to the main forestry data. And then also when we want to archive data, we can use that same I can use that same notebook to copy features from the main working data into an archive data set at, 4 a.m. when this runs every day. And then our field staff don't have to look at archive data. They can just look at the main working data within the data set. And when it's already 9,000 stands across the state, you don't want to balloon that more with that archive data. So this is kind of great workflow to move things back and forth between feature services, update fields as needed, good stuff like that. And then finally, staff at the agency have been really involved with the North Carolina Bird Atlas project. If you're interested in birding and don't know about this, go check it out. It's really cool. Across the state, they set up this grid of what they call priority blocks for people to go out and get a survey of birds within those blocks regularly throughout the year. And folks can adopt a block as the primary birder in that block. When staff set this up, they set up that the sign up to adopt a block as a Google sheet and a Google form. So the data is stored in a Google sheet. But then we had to figure out how can we update this feature service that's in this map online when someone adopts a block. And we wanted to do it in a way that someone didn't have to go in and point and click and figure stuff out. So using a notebook again, we can, you can use pip to install new libraries within the notebooks. So you can install the Google spreadsheet library and then access that data in the Google sheet and update your feature service. And so that took a lot of load and stress off of staff to try to figure out how do we make these kind of disparate applications talk to each other. I'm a little short on time, but anyway, you can access the spreadsheet, pull all of the data directly from that spreadsheet, and then update the feature layer that's in ArcGIS Online. So in summary, I hope I provided or made a good point for Esri notebooks to provide a convenient way to schedule daily tasks and also remain in the Esri environment. These webhooks that work in between, it's sending a chunk of data in between applications. They make for a convenient path for notifications, both instantaneously, like with the Survey 123 application, and on a kind of scheduled basis with the notebooks for larger, more regular chunks of data. I think I found it really important to focus the efforts within platforms that are already have existing credentials, avoid storing sensitive data or making too many connections that you have to manage between applications. And while there's a lot of really good resources out there, make use of them, get creative, take bits of code. I'm a Python hack. I never took any classes in Python, but you can learn so much just by like reading other bits of code and taking pieces from here and there. And yeah, it's a great tool to learn as GIS professionals. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions. There's a link here for that Esri blog, as well as the sample notifications. If you notice any egregious Python errors, I'd love to know about them because I'm always trying to learn. Yeah, thank you. Questions?
So in our organization, we have kind of administrator account and then kind of regular creator account. And primarily we use the administrator account to do administrative stuff. To execute all of this, you have to be an administrator, or if you're just working on kind of your own data as a creator to implement things like that.
Yeah, so the question is what is the difference between like being an administrator and a regular like creator account and using these kind of notebooks? I think I'm correct in saying that at least all the examples I showed here are just kind of data management for layers that I own. And if you're in a group and you have edit privileges for layers, as far as I'm aware, this is all just like running tools. So if you wanted to do things like actually administer your organization, manage users, delete content, or move content around, then I think you would have to have the administrator privileges. But for content management and feature layer updates and things like that, as far as I'm aware, you can do all of that from the creator account. Comes with a caveat of saying that I am an administrator in our organization, and so I haven't necessarily explored it from the creator side, but I think I'm right in saying that. Okay, thank you. Yes, there is a setting in the roles that you have to have notebooks enabled for that user. Cool, thank you. I appreciate that. Are there any webhooks that work with the Office 365 app? I don't know the answer to that. I know Esri has invested a lot of time in the infrastructure between Office 365 and the online environment. With the state, we have certain things set up and certain things that aren't set up. So like at one point I was exploring, there's a connector between ArcGIS Online and Teams, and there's even like a webhook connector within Teams. So I was thinking, oh, that would be cool if like when a new survey is submitted or when that code runs, it could just send like a Teams message, because like all of our inboxes are full, and maybe our Teams are full too. But unfortunately, I like emailed our IT people and like, oh, that's not enabled at the state level, and we'd have to like justify it. And so that's kind of two ways of saying, I think Esri has spent a lot of time investing in connections and webhook connections with the Office environment, but also check with what's enabled it within your organization. Sure. I don't know like exactly where that lines up. What she was saying was that when you're setting up privileges for an account, you have to, I guess with certain account levels, you have to enable notebook access. So like as an administrator role myself, I guess that was already enabled, but for other account levels, it may be enabled for like publisher perhaps and not for creator or something like that, but it's something that can be toggled on and off. Welcome. So was Power Automate easier to use over Make? They each have their own place. And I say that because like there's a difference between like I was trying to remain in like the free tier access to everything. And so the only Survey 123 connector in Power Automate that's free, I think, is the receive webhook. Like when a survey is submitted, you can get it that way. There's a lot of other things you can do with Survey 123 in Power Automate, but they require like premium tier. And I think if we were all to like go to our IT staff and justify it, they'd probably be like, yeah, that's fine, you can do that. We'll give you the premium tier. Make is probably like a little more in-depth, complicated. You have to do more of that like parsing the JSON and formatting. But there's also, with both of them, there's like a ton of documentation online. We probably all spend more time on like Google and Stack Exchange and Esri community than we want to admit, like trying to answer our own questions. So I don't think I really gave you an answer there. They're both good. They both have their place. Make was better for the email, like basic webhook processing and email notifications, but Power Automate already had a really streamlined version for receiving survey responses.
Yes, so for the email notifications, that the part where it created the downloadable link to the photos, could you send those email notifications to people that don't have ArcGIS Online accounts, and those people are able to download the pictures?
So the question was, can you send those with the photo URLs that were in the Power Automate workflow from Survey 123? Can you send those emails to people who don't have an ArcGIS Online account, and can they access those photos? I think that would depend on whether the data itself in ArcGIS Online is accessible to the public outside of your organization, because it's all just like whether that's a public URL or not. I think those links probably only work. I haven't tested it, but I think it would all just depend on what the permissions are for the layer itself.
So AGOL restricts to only 5 notebooks and running simultaneously. How do we get around? Or where's the method you use to use more features or compile features?
So when you say running simultaneous, in short, to answer your question, I'm only running like 3 or 4 right now, so I haven't gone over 5. But is running simultaneously like actually operating at the same time?
Yeah, you can have 20 notebooks, only 5 can be active.
Oh, like you could only have tasks for like.
Yeah.
Okay. I don't have an answer to that because I haven't tried. But it's good to keep that in mind as perhaps we expand our notebook environment. Yeah. Cool. All right. Thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your conference.